Rakers, a science fiction action adventure. Part 2, Taken. Chapter 11. Goon Squad. They'd told her this could happen, that as the daughter of public, wealthy people, she would be at risk anywhere she went. For years, Grady had stuck nearby, a big shadow over her parties, playdates, and movie nights. Veronica figured the man's constant presence was a big reason why those invites dwindled over the years. Former friends deciding Veronica's bodyguard wasn't worth it. So when the man, Fade, still struck her as a strange name, knocked Grady out on her front lawn, Veronica felt strangely free. For the first time in a decade, she was on her own. The circumstances could have been better. Perhaps not, say, handcuffed to the car's door handle. But when the two crazy-dressed people started beating up on her kidnapper, Veronica forgot all about her own situation. The fight only lasted a few seconds, but the moves, self-defense classes, kickboxing, none of those compared to an actual fight by people that were good at it. This wasn't Grady grabbing some clueless high schooler and tossing him out the front door. These people knew what to do. Veronica plastered her face to the window and watched as Fade, having brushed by the guy in the cowboy hat, turned back to face them. He'd mentioned a ransom, but these didn't seem like the people that wanted her, unless these arrangements were a lot more violent than she'd imagined. So who were they? A loud crack rattled the car's windows. Veronica recognized the sound. A gunshot, and not from something small. Memories of the rifle range came back to her. Grady's insistence that she be capable, able to defend herself and know what was coming. Her eyes flicked to the back window, but she couldn't see much with the lights in the car seats blocking her way. The cowboy, though, had lurched. Maybe he'd been hit. A flash. Bright and instant. Like a camera going off. Veronica's eyes blurred for a second, faded auras lingering. Fade was on the ground now. How? Grady hadn't mentioned anything like this in their classes. Now the cowboy and the woman were dragging Fade away. Another crack of the rifle, and this time the woman fell over. Definitely hit. Definitely not going to make it. The woman laid there face down on the ground, her hand on her side. The cowboy hefted Fade and started to run. Some friend. But no, the woman was getting up now. On her knees, then her feet, and in a second she was gone, running into the darkness beyond the lights. Veronica sat back in the seat. The cuffs were tight on her hands. Her heart beat fast. A rush. Her eyes fell to the phone in her pocket. Possible, maybe to reach it, if she twisted enough. A hand slapped the window and Veronica jerked back, causing the cuffs to bite into her skin. A woman stood outside the car, a small gun in her hands. She met Veronica's eyes for a moment, then resumed looking around. Veronica waited for her to open the door, let her out, but the woman didn't. Eventually settled in, sitting on the car's hood. Fade's phone, sitting in the center console, buzzed suddenly. Veronica glanced at it. The name, in big letters. JC. A daughter trying to call her dad. Veronica wondered if JC knew what her dad did. What that would be like, having a kidnapper for a father. Those thoughts melted away as a series of other cars pulled up along the street. Men and women dressed in various shades of black suits exited out of the tinted window sedans. None of them held guns openly, but Veronica could tell from the way they looked, the way they walked, that these people weren't playing around. The woman jerked the car door open and Veronica nearly fell out onto the ground. "Where's the key?" the woman asked. "Cup holder." Veronica nodded towards the center console as she rose to a half-stand, her cuffed hands forcing her to lean down. "What happened to Fade?" "Don't worry about it." The woman fished the key out, turned and unlocked the cuffs as the first set of suits came around the vehicle. "Fade take off early?" said the first man, a tall, thin guy with a reedy voice. "Didn't expect to see you at all, Thalia." The woman glanced at Veronica with a frown, a look the man caught. "There were two people here," Talia said to the man. "One looked like a cowboy. They took us by surprise." "Not ours." The man looked at the others around him, laughed. "We're pretty set in our outfits." Talia took a step toward him and everyone froze. Veronica included. until the cuffs slid off her hands and clattered to the ground. "Look," the man said to Talia, "they weren't ours. We don't know who jumped Fade. If we hear anything, we'll call. Now, though, this is our girl?" "She's the one." The man looked at Veronica, smiled at her. Not in the slick, seedy way some men did. Not kind either. It was a smile without emotion. A transaction, that was all. "You're Veronica Pline?" the man said. Talia leaned back against the car, pulled out her phone. Apparently, she wasn't going to be any more help. "I am," Veronica answered. Grady had always said to cooperate if she was kidnapped. Cooperate and then look for a way out, a way to call for help. She still had her phone. "If you could come with me," the man said. Then to Talia, "As soon as we get her in the car, you'll get the payment." Talia nodded, her eyes not moving from her phone. The man held out his arm towards Veronica, and she went with him. Let him escort her around Fade's car, across the concrete dry dock and towards the largest sedan. "Are you going to hurt me?" Veronica asked the man. "Don't plan to," the man said. "Things go as they should. You'll be back home in a few days. We're not monsters." Veronica nodded. Though who would say they were monsters, really? The man leaned forward, opened the back door of the sedan, ushered her into the dark car. Veronica climbed in, sat in the seat, and nearly screamed when she noticed there was a man beside her. Veronica blocked most of the light coming from the dock, so the man's face was hidden in shadow. Until a match flared into flame, the man holding it against the long end of a cigar. His craggy eyes looked over at her, white hair glittering orange in the light. His mouth opened, smoke sifting out in a shallow breath. "Welcome to your new world, Miss Pline." Chapter 12. White Lies. The shots had hit both of them. Talia knew that. The cowboy had nearly fallen, and the woman had collapsed on her side. The rounds were large, deadly enough even without trying to kill, that both of them should have been down, should have needed a hospital stay before standing up again. Instead, they were gone, and Fade with them. For the first time, she'd lost her partner. Talia kept her eyes on her phone, watching for messages. Some sign from who'd taken Fade, waiting for the deposit from Ellsworth. "We're done here, Aaron," Ellsworth's reedy right-hand man said to her. "You should see it come through any minute now." "You leave before it does," Talia said. "We won't work with you again." Aaron laughed. "You know we're good for it. Anyway, looks like you might not have a we anymore." Talia didn't reply. Because Aaron might be right. Because Fade might not be coming back. One of the realities in this kind of work. Every friend meant a funeral. Her phone beeped. The notification of the pending deposit popped up on the screen. For the right amount, Talia looked over at Aaron, gave him a nod. "It's in. You're clear." Aaron started to walk away, then paused. "Talia, I don't know what happened to Fade, but for what it's worth, we hope you find him. Appreciate the work you've both done for us in the past." "Thanks." Aaron and his team poured back into the cars and sped off into the dark. Veronica Pline with them. Talia hoped the girl was ready for whatever Ellsworth had planned for her. Talia went into Fade's car, shut the passenger door, started the engine, and drove it away from the dry dock. Parked it on a side street a few blocks away where it wouldn't be towed, wouldn't be noticed. As she was about to step out, Talia saw Fade's phone in the center console. Buzzing again. JC. "Hello," Talia answered as she left the car, locked the door. "Talia," JC's voice was tight, angry. "Where's my dad?" "Busy." "What?" JC said. "You know he came to my party tonight? You know he kicked me out in front of everybody?" Talia kept walking along the street back towards her own car, where the rifle was packed and stored. "You shouldn't have been there." JC laughed, the tone of a kid who knows when they've caught an adult in a lie. An unreasonable expectation. "That's ridiculous. You're the ones who shouldn't have been there." Talia didn't know what to say. She wasn't the girl's mother. She tried to honor Fade's request not to talk about work in front of JC. Though how much longer Fade could keep it secret from his daughter, the girl was perceptive, Talia wasn't sure. JC had asked about clients she'd heard on the phone, understood through the frequency of pizza nights alone and early mornings where her dad came in the door as she went out of it, that Faye didn't work regular hours. But she didn't know anything about the violence, about the kidnappings, about how any given night like this one, her father stood a good chance of never coming home. JC, Talia said, you need to calm down. It's a party. Your father will be home later. You can talk to him then. When? I don't know. This could go on for a while. You should go to bed. Don't you have school in the morning? Wow, thanks for reminding me. Talia heard the sarcasm in JC's voice, felt it as the girl clicked off the call. Talia didn't plan to have kids, and these conversations weren't exactly changing her mind. Back at her car, Talia popped open the door and slid into the seat, put Fade's phone, along with hers, on the dashboard. There was a pattern to these things. Either someone would be calling and asking to ransom Fade, or Fade himself would have found a way out and would be calling for a pickup, or the phones would stay silent and Fade would be dead. Chapter 13. Backseat sneaking. Fade could tell that he was moving, could feel the rumbling in his bones as the SUV went over roads smooth and rough, as it stopped at intersections and started again. Eventually, he became aware that they were talking. Load, the cowboy, and even the front seats. He noticed the backpack beside him, the one Eve had been wearing. Fade found he could move his fingers and toes. He could feel his arms. I still say the cliff is the best point around here, Load was speaking as he drove. There's not going to be anyone there this time of night. They won't find his body anytime soon. We should go further away, Eve countered. We'll need time to see the effects. See whether another one takes his place right here. Fade didn't know what they were talking about. To be honest, he didn't really care. His eyes shifted over to the backpack. His pockets, aside from his wallet, were empty. No phone, no way to get help. But that backpack, Fade had seen it before. Done it himself once or twice. Once you had your target cuffed and out, you relaxed. Thought you were safe. Left things where they shouldn't be. With his left hand, careful not to move his head, his legs, or anything else, Fade snaked his fingers over to the backpack, felt along the zipper on the main flap. Opening it would make a noise, which meant he needed a distraction. He was the nexus, though, Load was saying. We take care of him, and we should have some time. At least it'll get the gardener off our backs. Fade saw the cowboy nod, made his move. That was a hell of a thing you hit me with, Fade announced. He felt the SUV jerk, Load hitting the brake in surprise. Fade used the sound of his own voice to cover his left hand, slipping the zipper up. Enough so he could reach inside. You're not supposed to be awake yet, Load said, and Fade could see the cowboy's eyes in the rearview mirror. Sorry to spoil your party. Fade could feel, inside the backpack, a possibility. Some small, hard thing, a rectangle. Come on, let him get lucky, just this once. It's not a party, Eve said. You need to die for everyone else. That's comforting, Fade replied. I'd hate to die for no reason. He wrapped his left hand around the object in the backpack, twisted his wrist so that the back of his hand would hide what he was pulling out. It doesn't matter, Load said to Eve. Don't talk to him. You know how you get. You're not the leader, Eve said to him. Discord. Interesting. Fade noticed Load's eyes were not on him anymore, and he shifted his left hand, moved the object, the small phone, to his right, held it down and out of sight behind Eve's seat, glanced at it. The phone was an old model, several years out of date. The kind of thing you might buy at a secondhand store if you needed something cheap. It was powered off, which presented its own challenge. And I'm your partner, Load said. Just telling you what I think is all. What I think is that there are other ways, Eve said. Ways to change the direction without killing. Fade held down the button on the right side of the phone, prayed that the thing wouldn't chime or make some other noise as it powered on. The screen flashed white, the company logo appeared. No noise yet. You're saying that, but you know it's easiest, Load said. You can't expect to talk your way out of every situation. But I wouldn't mind talking our way out of some. You know as well as I do that killing someone leaves a hole. Sometimes it doesn't work out the way we want. The logo vanished and the startup screen appeared. The phone was locked. Fade stared at a number pad on the screen. It asked him to input 4 digits. His eyes flicked back to the pair arguing in the front seat. Outside the window, he could make out mountains in the moonlight. They were swerving through curvy roads. North of the city then. Isolated. Few lights. So you tell me then, Lode said. We tried to talk our way out. How did that work the last time? Eve stayed quiet. That's what I thought. Lode reached over and pressed the power button for the radio. Turned on classical. Fade recognized the piece. It was Mozart. Eine kleine Nachtmusik. I heard this, Eve said after a minute. He was such a small child at the time. We were all amazed. Fade quirked his head. What was she talking about? Maybe some recital? Then look back to the phone. They were using a device like this, driving an SUV listening to the radio instead of digital music. Dressed like weirdos. What were the odds that anything complicated was the password? He tapped 0 4 times. The phone shook slightly. No luck. You're awfully quiet back there, Lode said. Still not feeling great, Fade replied. Which wasn't really a lie. Whatever they'd hit him with had left his mind in a bit of a fog. His arms and legs tingled some, as though they'd been asleep for a long time. You were out, though you won't get to enjoy it for long. Lode, you don't have to talk to the man. Eve spoke with an irritated sigh, a mother admonishing her child. You have to stop treating these people like victims. They know what they've done. There's a reason we're here. Fade tried a sequence of ones. Again, the phone shook. What are you talking about? Fade said. I'm not a victim? If anything, you're your own victim, Lode said. You did or were going to do bad things. Enough bad things that we're going to stretch throughout the world and throw it off track. Send people in civilization back to the Dark Ages. You give me an awful lot of credit, Fade replied. So these two were insane then? Completely gone. Maybe they'd been fed Fade's name from someone who wanted him dead. Next, he tried 1234. Enter. The phone opened up. A simple array of applications looked like the stock set that came with the device, including the one he wanted. Lode, if you want the cliff, the turnoff's coming up right here, Eve said. You're going to be okay with that? Eve didn't say anything for a minute. I'll be all right, Eve said finally. Fade punched on the GPS. He found the option to send his location to a friend. He'd done this with Talia plenty of times, whenever he needed support. So he did it now. Pressed the button, and as the SUV slowed and made a left turn, the phone popped up the list of contacts to send to. All 0 of them. You want to throw me off a cliff? Fade said, trying to keep the conversation going, keep them distracted. Best if they find the body that there's no bullet holes. No stab wounds. No other mark of death, Lode said. Easier if they can't find a reason you died to call it an accident. How many people has this guy killed? Fade typed in Talia's number with his right hand. Sent the location, confirmed the message had gone out, then he shut off the phone. If he was going to survive, it wasn't going to be up to him. Chapter 14. Ticking clocks. JC started awake. The TV had changed shows, or rather advertisements. It was infomercial hour, the time of day she never saw unless it was a sleepover. Even then, they wouldn't be watching the 30-minute vlogs for products they didn't have the money to buy. She cast her eyes around the living room, looked for signs her dad had come home. Nothing. The sole lamp, standing taller than she was, showered the room in white light. A change she'd protested that Fade insisted on in the name of environmentalism. It did, though, make the pictures stand out. No paintings, only photographs. Places she'd been with her father, with her mother, where the two of them, her parents, had journeyed before she was even born. The photos dotted the walls, too many of them, really, as though their family loved nothing but each other. JC slid off the couch, bumped her shin against the coffee table, and stumbled into the kitchen as she rubbed it. The oven clock ticked past midnight. Midnight on a Tuesday, on a school night, well past the time her dad should be home. Not that he didn't have late nights from time to time, but not like this. He would answer when she called, or text when he was going to be home late. This time, there had been nothing. And why did Talia have his phone? There had been nothing once before, too. JC poured herself a glass of water, glanced around, tried to imagine how it had been only a few hours before. Had her father been acting differently? Dinner had seemed normal. Taco takeout, an ever-increasing part of their life these days. Had he been on edge? No, but showing up at the party? What was that about? She left the kitchen, went up to her dad's room, opened the door, the bed made, the floral print sheets, something she'd imagined her dad would have got rid of a long time ago, except those were her mother's. JC looked at the closet and its shut brown doors. Behind it hung an array of her father's suits, but half of the space belonged to clothes that no longer had an owner. Those dresses, the outfits her mother had worn, they were still there. No sign of fade here either. No note, no disarray from a hurriedly packed suitcase. She took a sip of the water, a cold dose of reality. She shut the bedroom door and left, went back downstairs. Her phone still blank. She turned it on and checked, but there were no missed calls, no more messages. Well, that wasn't quite true. Allie Carter had tossed one more laughing sentence about how JC's dad had ruined their night. That's what this was to Allie, a joke, something ridiculous. The two of them had planned the guilt trip on the ride home. JC's strategy for pouting and posturing to get her dad to leave her alone, or at least buy her something nice. But why had he been at the party at all? JC looked at the photo above the TV, a big one, blown up so that it covered most of the wall. A panorama with the three of them standing on a beach. Along either side, the crystal blue waters stretched off until they met the clouds in the horizon. The smiles were broad. JC thought her face was covered with too much of her hair, blowing wildly in the wind. There was joy in that picture, though. She looked back at the phone. The last time her parents had been gone late, it had been like this. The clock had ticked into morning without communication, without words. Only one of them had come home. Chapter 15. Cliff bumping. Load pulled Fade out of the SUV and pushed him along the sandy ground. Scraggly weeds poked at his legs. Fade couldn't help but love the feel of the wind on his face, cool in the pre-dawn weather. The horizon behind them, beyond the small mountains, glowing a soft purple that presaged the sun. The peninsula was fat around them. They had driven off the road, close to the edge. The ground was flat and hard, easy enough for the SUV to go over. "Go and stand over there," Load pointed near the edge, showing the way with a large flashlight. "Don't draw this out." "What I don't understand," Fade said, taking long, slow steps, "is why." "Why what?" Load said. "Why me?" Fade spread his arms, threw on an innocent face. "I didn't think I was worth anybody's time. Who's paying you?" "We're not doing this for the money," Eve said. "We don't need it." "For fun, then?" Fade shuffled his shoes through the sand. He'd never been threatened with falling off a cliff before, but he'd seen his fair share of do-or-die moments. The best way to get out of those was to draw them out, find a way to escape or change their mind. As soon as they stopped talking, you'd lost the battle. "We do it because we have to," Load said. "That's all you need to know." "Since I'm the one that's dying, I think I'll decide what I need to know," Fade replied. "Besides, you're the ones who will have to tell my daughter why her father's not coming home." He hated himself a little for using JC like this. The girl didn't deserve to be a bargaining chip in her father's problems. Then again, what would JC rather have? Nobody? Or her father? Eve frowned. "You have a daughter?" "Eve," Load said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who knew where the conversation was going, who was trying to stop it dead. "JC," Fade said, My little girl. Eve turned a conflicted look at Lode. Fade caught their eyes. Lode's sudden grimace. These two were not perfect partners, and Eve held Fade's the best chance of getting out of here alive. If I had my phone, I could show you pictures, Fade continued. She's bubbly, smart. Sometimes, really, I'm scared of what she'll do next. Quiet, Lode eyed Eve. Don't. We've been in this situation before. A child doesn't make the parent innocent. Eve ignored Fade's comment, looked squarely at Fade. We keep the world stable. Right now, you're the biggest threat to that stability. By removing you, humanity gets a little better. Me, Fade said. I don't know what world you're living on, but I am in no way the biggest threat. You've got rogue dictators, nuclear weapons running amok, and you're going after me? Behind them, Fade caught the sign he was looking for. Lights making their way down the winding road as the sky grew lighter. The far-off rumbling of an engine. Hope coming for him. We go where we're told, Eve said. What we know is that soon, if left alone, you will do something that throws this planet down a path from which it will not recover. That makes sense. Not crazy at all. It doesn't matter, Lode interjected. We're wasting time. Jump now. Fade folded his arms. You'll have to make me. The engine noise drew closer. Lode glanced back. Not supposed to be a car at this hour. The cowboy reached into his belt, pulled out one of his pistols, aimed at Fade and cocked back the hammer. Jump or I shoot you off. Fire away, Fade said. The engine noise grew loud. Fade could see Thalia's car racing towards them, well above whatever speed was appropriate for the coastal road. Eve turned to face the car as Lode tightened his fingers on the trigger. Lode, I think, Eve started to say, and Lode turned her way in time to see Thalia's car leave the road, roar by their SUV, brake and slide, and smash into the two of them. The force was fast enough, hard enough, that Eve and Lode flew through the air. Fade watched them fly like something from a movie and hit the ground. They flopped and rolled and then vanished off the cliff. Fade looked at the spot where they'd been and shrugged. Interesting pair. Wasn't sad that he wouldn't be seeing any more of them, though. Nice timing, Fade said as he slipped in the passenger seat. You're paying to get those dents out. Thalia started back towards the road. How did you send me the location? I get the impression that they didn't really know modern technology, Fade said after describing his theft of their phone. They were strange. Were being the key word. Ellsworth paid up. We're good to go. You maybe. I'm going to have one sassy daughter when I get home. Fade picked up his phone, sent a quick text, told JC he was safe. Chapter 16. Benefits. Veronica tried to tell where they were by looking outside the sedan's windows, but the dark tint kept the nighttime world a black shadow. All she knew was that they had left the port far behind. Deep silence consumed the minutes as Ellsworth puffed on his cigar. Veronica wasn't sure what he was waiting for. A reaction from her? A signal from his driver? She glanced over at him, his eyes peering out the window, at the same nothing she saw. So what do you want? Veronica asked when she couldn't take it anymore. Ellsworth glanced at her, said nothing. So Veronica reached for her phone, nabbed it out of her pocket. Before she could bring it up to her face, however, Ellsworth's hand reached over and plucked it out of her grasp. He held it, stared at the blank screen in the light of his cigar. Then he set it down in the seat. Wait, Ellsworth said. So Veronica waited. The car played no music. The driver didn't speak. If this was a kidnapping, to Veronica, it was the most boring thing she'd ever experienced. The sedan turned into a parking lot, and she heard the grind of a garage door rising. Street lamps were all around now, but possibly due to the late hour, the parking lot was empty. They went down, the slope deep enough for Veronica to notice, far into the garage beneath the ground. Gray concrete walls were illuminated with fluorescent lights, their white-blue glow taking Veronica out of time and place. Without windows in the haze of her own exhaustion, Veronica fell into the surreal. It wasn't a large garage, not more than a dozen spaces, most of them already taken up by menagerie of sedans, SUVs. Down here, apparently, working hours were flexible. "We can talk now," Ellsworth said suddenly. "Under here, nobody can listen in." "Listen in?" Veronica shook her head, dusted off the cobwebs. "Sometimes." Ellsworth unbuckled his seatbelt, held his cigar in his left hand as he pushed open his door. "You get to be so popular with a certain crowd, they never want to leave you alone. So you have to find your safe space." Veronica's door opened. Ellsworth's driver stood on the other side, beckoning her out. Veronica started to leave, then turned back for her phone, but it was gone. Ellsworth must have taken it. She stood up and met Ellsworth behind the car. He led her towards a lone door, heavy and red and metal. His driver followed a couple of yards back. "What friends?" Veronica said. "I've got all kinds. Some of them even like me," Ellsworth replied. "But to get back to your question, the reason you're here at all, surely you know who your father is." Veronica tried to think of the right response. Of course she knew her father's name, knew he was a billionaire tech business owner. He had a lot of projects going on at any one time and seemed to find his way onto the covers of magazines more often than not. That didn't seem to be what Ellsworth was asking. "He's an ambitious man," Veronica offered. Ellsworth nodded. "There's nothing wrong with that," Ellsworth said. "In fact, I quite admire his success. Your father has been rather ruthless in his ventures." They reached the door, and Ellsworth stepped forward, gripped the handle, and twisted it. Locks released, and the door opened. Ellsworth ushered Veronica in. Beyond the door sat a hallway straight and long. Veronica could see a series of rooms on both sides, doors and other hallways leading off. A maze, maybe. "What do you mean by ruthless?" Veronica said. "I only ever meet people who tell me how much they appreciate my father's work." "Of course that's what they say." Ellsworth led her down the hallway, stopped at the first door, turned to it. "This room is for the ones who don't like what I do." Ellsworth pushed open the door. Inside sat a single chair. On the wall in front of it hung a variety of implements that Veronica could only describe as disturbing. "Who don't like what you do?" "I'm not a terrible person," Ellsworth said to Veronica. He stepped over past the chair to one of the implements, a long-edged knife. "However, in the course of things, I meet people who are stuck in their views, who find it better to oppose than join me. And so sometimes I have to be more persuasive." Ellsworth held the blade for a long moment and then put it back on the rack. "Are you trying to intimidate me?" Veronica said. Because why else would Ellsworth be showing her these? "Intimidation is just another type of negotiation," Ellsworth replied, leading her from the room. "Everyone responds differently. Some forms are more effective than others. You still haven't told me what you said about my father?" Veronica mentioned as they went back into the hall. She tried to keep her voice even, tried not to think about what might happen if Ellsworth decided to use one of the blades on her. "Your father has something that I want," Ellsworth said. "He acquired it by cheating several of my friends, promising a cooperative venture, and then taking the rewards for himself. In effect, Veronica, your father stole that which should be mine." They went down the hallway until they reached another metal door on the right. Ellsworth pushed this one open. A long table with padded wheeled office chairs alongside it. A small shelf set with water and coffee, and an array of donuts that looked fresh hugged the corner of the room. On one end was a screen, large and black. "This isn't all that frightening," Veronica said. "It doesn't need to be," Ellsworth said. "As I said, different methods. From time to time, it becomes necessary to show the outside that those I'm meeting with are treated well." Back to the hallway, into another door on the left. "What did my father steal?" Veronica said. "That's the thing," Ellsworth said. "I don't quite know what it is, only that I need it, want it, and that he does not deserve it." This room was different. It had carpeting, unlike all the others. A chair set in the middle, a sole recliner. Veronica noted speakers around the room. A large TV mounted on the wall in front of the chair. "Let me guess, you force people to watch things? Listen to things they don't want to hear?" Veronica said. "Or that they want to hear very much," Ellsworth said. "I don't trust so much in torture, in pain, What I'd rather do, what I would rather achieve is a mutual bargain, where both parties come away with something they need. I find the effort to be much stronger in such cases. What am I getting out of this bargain? Veronica said. Your father is getting you, Ellsworth said. They went back into the hallway, towards the next door. That's not what I asked, Veronica said. What am I getting out of this? Ellsworth paused, turned and looked at Veronica in the hallway. His mouth spread into a slow smile. Veronica Pline, you are a very surprising young woman. Chapter 17. Just words. The key turned in the lock. JC watched the deadbolt slide as morning sunlight poured through the hallway from the back. When her father stepped through into the house, JC's hand was already moving. The slap connected, hard enough to send Fade back a step, almost falling back out the door. JC wound her hand back for another go, but Fade caught it. Not exactly the welcome I was hoping for. Fade, with his right hand, massaged his cheek where JC had struck. You're lucky to get a welcome at all, JC replied. You know what you did to me last night? You know how terrible that was? It was worse for me, I bet, Fade said. Worse for you? JC backed up a step, contemplated swinging her backpack at her father. But if there was one thing she'd learned over the years, it's that her words, her emotions, hit harder than physical blows. Still, that slap had been mighty satisfying. You don't want to know, Fade said, stepping in and shutting the door behind him. Of course not. Why would I want to know why my only father vanished without a word for hours last night? Why wouldn't I stay quiet, accept it as another strange evening in a lifetime of them? JC let the rush of tragic anger, self-pity sweep over her. She'd expected it, planned for it, just like she knew that every time a movie made it to that scene with the rising orchestra, the emotional climax, tears would come to her eyes. She knew it would happen here too, and she used it. JC, come on. I'm sorry, Fade tried to wrap her up in a hug, but JC pushed him back. No, you know how she died. You know she didn't come back. You can't do the same thing to me. That wasn't my intention, Fade said. Things got out of hand. Stop making excuses. JC turned and went back into the kitchen. She had to breathe for a second. She didn't want to lose control, didn't want Fade to see this. That was the problem with vulnerability. You couldn't always control it. It won't happen again, Fade said as he followed her. I promise. You're a liar, JC said. You're a liar, and that's all there is to it. I'm your daughter, and I have to live with that. But I don't. I don't have to hear promises that you'll never keep. So don't say them. Her father looked like he was at a loss, had nowhere to turn. No ready phrases or quips for this one. Good. I don't know if you understand what it's like, JC said. I don't know if you get it. You're all that I have. Without Mom, you're it. I've come to terms with that. I know you're not perfect, but I want you to think, to remember that I'm here, and that I need you. I'm sorry, Fade said. But his eyes, his sunken shoulders, showed he knew how inadequate that statement was. I've got to go, JC said. Allie's going to be rolling up in a second. Then I'll go to school and try to explain to people why you appeared at a party last night, why I look like I haven't slept at all. It's going to be a hell of a day. If it means anything, Fade said to JC's back, I didn't plan to. It wasn't my fault. JC looked back. You keep saying things like that. Every time you disappear for something, every time you have to cancel. But you never explain. You never explain why Mother didn't come back either. You can live with those secrets, apparently. But I don't know if I can. JC picked up her bag, opened the door, and went out. Shut it and her father behind her. Took the breaths and kept walking. Texted Allie to meet her on the corner at the end of the block. Right now, she wanted to be anywhere but home. Chapter 18. Guilt over easy. There were eggs on the stove, ready for him to eat. Coffee, freshly made, sitting on the counter. In spite of the tirade, in spite of her attitude, JC had welcomed him back. Fade filled the plate, sat down at the table, and stared at nothing for a minute. He didn't deserve her for a daughter. Didn't deserve someone that would take his abuses and keep coming back for more. Who would accept his half-hearted explanations and still hug him before she went to bed at night? Who would let him come and watch her in the plays? Who would call him father? Only hours ago, he'd been on a cliff, staring at the end of his life, about to make JC an orphan. The thing was, that wasn't the first time, wasn't the fifth time, or the 10th. He'd been putting himself in situations he didn't deserve to live through for years now. It had only grown worse since his wife, since Maggie. No, he had his reasons. Fade looked around the kitchen, the new refrigerator, the shiny oven with more features than he could count, the house that they could call theirs and not the bank's. He had reasons. This wasn't a fling, wasn't for fun. He finished the eggs, tossed the plates in the dishwasher, and went upstairs. The window in his bedroom looked over a small backyard and then over a fence into their neighbors. Fade could see a play set there for kids much younger than JC. Through their window, a kitchen that looked much like his own. Only he bet they didn't kidnap people for a living, didn't brave gunfights, taking fists to the face, or driving car chases in the dead of night. Yet they had everything he did. So why? Why was he risking it all for this? His phone beeped. Fade took it out, glanced at it. Cost to fix the dents, $800. Talia, already getting her car with its new body-shaped bumps fixed up. The same mechanic they both had used for a long time, that worked with her uncle, kept a quiet mouth. Cost a little bit more, but that fee was nothing when they were able to avoid questions. I'll cover it. Fade sent the reply and went to the bathroom. Turned on the shower and let the hot water mix with the coffee he drank to wake him back up. Another all-nighter. He'd make it through today fine. Pass out tonight. Tomorrow he'd feel as though his mind moved in slow motion. That's how it went. He'd met Maggie, oddly enough, on the team. Special Forces. They'd been in the same squad, running missions together. 5 years and then they were out. 5 years of bonding through adrenaline and firepower, of trusting one another for their survival. It'd been their first date in the real world, outside of the barracks and the hidden specter of being called back that had sealed it for him. The date itself had been a simple one. Dinner, and instead of a movie, the state fair. A long night full of bad carnival rides, midway games where they took turns winning and giving the overstuffed prizes to nearby kids. Cotton candy, deep-fried butter. For a moment, the two of them had been everything that he wanted. His phone beeped as he got out of the shower. How'd she take it? That was Thalia for you, always nosing in. But then Fade appreciated her perspective. Thalia usually had a better idea of what JC was thinking than he did. Slapped me hard. Left. It hadn't taken long after the state fair for rings to be exchanged. Though even then, Fade had known they were running out of time. Out of normal jobs that suited their particular skills. Of course, they had contacts. When you get into a certain field, you meet people. People that, if you do your job well, are only too happy to refer you. Only too happy to keep you in the net. She'll get over it. I need to make it up to her. Any ideas? It wasn't that they planned to go that way, but the money was good. Fade would be lying if he said he didn't like the rush. If both he and Maggie didn't like running through the dark, completing contracts. If the adrenaline had brought them together in ways the simple domestic life couldn't quite match. Fade went to the closet, opened it, put on a set of pajamas. His eyes lingered on Maggie's dresses, the way they always did when he opened those doors. Take her somewhere fun for dinner. Father-daughter date time. Yeah, that might work. He'd be tired. But for JC, it was worth it. His eyes fell to the bottom corner of the closet, a small, strong box. In it, he knew, was Maggie's gun. The only one in the house. Fade had ditched his, all of them, after that night. Preferred it up close and personal now. Safer that way. Good idea. Keep me updated if something comes in. Fade didn't want to keep doing this, but he knew deep down that it wasn't going to end, that he couldn't go and find a normal job. He couldn't punch a clock. That wasn't the way Fade was wired, so he'd keep doing what he had to, He would keep going out late at night, filling contracts and apologizing to JC the next morning, until inevitably he wouldn't come home. Chapter 19. So many murders. This had been the third time she'd killed a person with her car, though this had been the first double, which was kind of neat in a terrible way. Talia sat back in her chair at a desk in her apartment, a one-bedroom affair that spent most of its credit on the kitchen and its sweeping counter. A pull-out couch and TV dominated the living room. Pictures hadn't made their way to the walls even though she'd moved in years ago. Decorating took time, looking at them took time, and Talia didn't have any of that. Out front, sandwiched tight on the street, was the generic loaner the mechanic had given her. It would only take a day or two at most to clear out the dents. Would have lasted longer had there been any blood. Not that Thalia had mentioned where the dents had come from, but this guy wasn't stupid. There'd been blood on the others, though, those that she'd taken out or seen taken out with vehicles. So why not this time? Maybe they had thick clothes on, or she'd hit them at the right angle. Either way, they had gone off the cliff. So why was she looking them up? Typing the combination, a cowboy and a woman in exercise gear a couple decades out of fashion, and seeing what the internet could turn up. Surfing for images, for articles. Maybe it was because she couldn't stop thinking about that flash, about how they'd come out of nowhere, knocked fate out without throwing a punch, how they'd taken her rounds and kept on moving. Because if they'd taken her shots and they could take a hit from her car, then maybe they could handle falling off a cliff. The first round of sights proved to be nothing. Generic stuff. Pictures of people dressed up as cowboys, articles about Fold West revival shows and 80s workout routines. Nothing she wanted. But the second set, now there was something. She started getting into the weirder publications, the blogs and local papers that tended less towards real journalism and more towards tabloid fare. There she found a few reports. Some quoted crazies talking about people vanishing at the same time a cowboy had been sighted. Wherever the pair was mentioned, other people vanished. Mysterious disappearances. Bodies found months, weeks, years later with no markers on them to identify the way they died. If there had been only one or two of these hyperbolic articles, Thalia would have dismissed them. But within an hour of searching, she'd found more than 10, scattered all around the world, in languages as diverse as anything she'd ever looked up. Africa, Asia, South America. The only continent not represented was Antarctica, and Thalia wondered if that was only because there weren't that many tabloids operating in that snowy wasteland. Who were these people? Because the other thing that was disturbing her, the thing that was really throwing Thalia, wasn't that these two seemed to appear all over the globe. It was that the first sighting of the pair was recorded 70 years ago, during World War II, where the duo had been seen in Germany, the same day a couple of more repressive Nazi officers committed suicide. If Thalia had seen the same two last night, they would have had to be more than 100 years old. It seemed like fate had been captured by an impossibility. Chapter 20. Priorities. Veronica stayed in a room with two sets of bunk beds, the mattresses more like cots, the sheets scratchy and thin. All through the rest of the night, unidentifiable machines whirred in the background. Air conditioning, maybe, or water rushing through pipes. Veronica figured the noises would make it hard for her to sleep. But when she collapsed onto the lower right side bed and heard the door's lock click behind her, she passed out fast and woke up 6 hours later with the door opening, Ellsworth's man Aaron on the other side. How he looked so refreshed after a night that had to be even later than her own, Veronica didn't know. He escorted her to a single-stall bathroom and shower, stood outside till she was done. Inside the stall was a bag with a change of clothes, tags still on. They weren't a perfect fit, and the t-shirt and jeans look wasn't really her thing, but after a night spent in a party outfit, Veronica could deal. "More than I expected for a hostage," Veronica said as she left the bathroom. "Depends on who the hostage is," Aaron replied, affable and calm. "We have nothing against you personally, so there's no reason to make you suffer." "I appreciate that, I guess." "If you get Mr. Ellsworth what he's looking for, then it's all worth it." Aaron led her back down the hallway to the room with the conference table and chairs. Ellsworth was already in there, sipping coffee and devouring donut holes in big bites. "Feel free to take one." Ellsworth gestured for Veronica to sit down. Aaron shut the door behind her and took a spot to her left. "They're fresh." Same with the coffee. Veronica glanced at the pile of glazed pastries, at the thermos in the middle of the table. "Maybe a glass of water?" Ellsworth glanced at Aaron, who jumped up and left. Then Ellsworth reached into his pocket and pulled out Veronica's phone, slid it across to her. "Now what you're going to do is dial your father. Say exactly what happened to you. I don't care if you mention my name, because it's not my real one." Ellsworth held up a hand, a single finger. "When I go like this, I want you to slide the phone back across to me and I'll finish the conversation. Simple enough?" Veronica nodded. "What should I say?" Ellsworth gave a placating smile. "Tell him the truth. You're in my company, and to get out of it, your father has to give me what I want." Aaron came back in with the water, set it down in front of Veronica. She took a long sip, and with Aaron and Ellsworth watching her, picked up the phone and found her dad. Strange that the reception could be so good underground, but it looked like she had full bars. Then again, if Ellsworth regularly took people down here, perhaps he'd planned for things like this. The phone rang. Aaron took it from her, set it down on the table, and pressed the speaker button. Veronica took a deep breath. "Hey!" Her dad, Christopher Pline, answered the phone with nervous excitement. "Where are you?" Grady called. "He's frantic, trying to find you. He's telling me that—" "Dad, stop for a second, could you?" "What?" "I was kidnapped, Dad, last night." "Kidnapped? By who?" "Someone named Ellsworth. They took me to a building. I'm underground right now." Veronica kept her eyes on Ellsworth. He nodded back at her. Took that as a sign she was doing well. "I'm all right. They're not hurting me." "Veronica, I'm going to call the police now. I should have had Grady do it last night, but he wanted to do some digging first." "Don't, Dad. You don't need to get the police involved." "I don't?" Ellsworth's fingers shot up. Veronica hesitated. Aaron reached over and pushed the phone across the table. Veronica sat back, hearing her dad sound so concerned. That surprised her. It had been a long time since she'd heard anything like that. Anything other than demands for progress, for excellence, scolding for not being brilliant enough, or simple ignorance, a downplaying of her priorities in the face of his thousands of business conflicts. Yet there her father had seemed almost human. "Mr. Pline, this is Ellsworth." The man stuffed another donut hole into his mouth, chewed it twice and swallowed it. Veronica thought he'd choke, but Ellsworth apparently had incredible throat muscles. "You have my daughter?" "I'm borrowing her, really. No interest in keeping her. I'm hoping we can make a deal." "A deal? You want money?" "No money. Don't need money." Ellsworth drank some of the coffee, moved the mug a little fast and a bit sloshed over the lip onto the table. Ellsworth ran his finger over the tiny puddle, his eyes watching his own movements. "Christopher, I'm going to get right to it. We're both busy men, and surely you can understand. I want the gem." "The gem? Don't play dumb, Christopher. There's only one badge that someone might kidnap your daughter for. You know precisely what it is. I want it. You give it to me, and I give you Veronica." Silence. Veronica waited. Her dad would say yes any second now. He had to, right? Wasn't that what parents did? Christopher Pline said nothing. Ellsworth looked up from the coffee stain directly at Veronica, shook his head slightly. "Ellsworth, is my daughter still there?" Ellsworth looked right at Veronica, then back at the phone. "She's back in her room. You won't hurt her?" "I gave you the terms of the deal, Christopher." "Can you wait one more day?" "4? There's something happening tonight, something that should allow me to make the deal you're looking for. I'm as interested in a successful resolution to this matter as you are," Ellsworth said. "You have your day, Christopher." Veronica heard the conversation continue. Numbers for calls were exchanged, but she didn't pay much attention to them. Instead, she centered on one fact. She'd known, of course, that her father cared deeply about his work, about his companies and what he did with them. If she were being truly honest with herself, she could have admitted he cared more about those companies than about her. Only now it was clear. This is the end of Rakers, Part 2. Keep a lookout for Part 3 soon, and for more adventures, check out blackeybooks.com. Thanks for listening.